A good hour of technical difficulties to bring you this interview, and I'm so grateful Tara was willing to endure with us. So, Tara, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Ajahn.
So, Tara uh, is a spiritual teacher who, from teenage years onward, has been deeply interested in personal growth and self-development. She holds an MA in education and has postgraduate qualifications in Gestalt therapy, body awareness therapy, and transpersonal spiritual therapy. She has worked as a drugs counselor, counselor for adolescents, and general psychotherapist since 1988. Tara has been a dedicated Buddhist practitioner since 1986. In 1997, she received encouragement from her Buddhist teacher Rigjin Shikpo to teach meditation. Since 2010, Tara has specialized in helping people suffering from Kundalini symptoms, or the Kundalini symptom, also known as spiritual crisis. She herself had her first Kundalini awakening at the age of 17. Tara has worked with over 2,000 clients suffering from spiritual crisis as a Kundalini teacher and therapist in many thousands of sessions. She is the author of 10 self-help books, which have been translated into 9 languages. And as a bit of context for how I came to hear of Tara, I have recently been encountering quite a few practitioners in our community and elsewhere who, after emerging from intensive retreat, either 10-day retreats or other versions, have suffered some pretty distressing symptoms, including dissociation and visions, voices, and more. Additionally, in the monastery, you often encounter monks and practitioners who, over the course of many years, encounter increasing difficulties, both mentally and physically, which just don't resolve in the meditative practices as we are often taught them in those monastic environments. And when I approached a practitioner in our community I know who's really worked with these symptoms in himself, the teacher he most strongly recommended was Tara. And so, for the sake of others who may have encountered these difficulties themselves coming out of meditation, retreat, or prolonged spiritual practice, or know of those who have, I thought bringing Tara onto the channel would be really helpful. So, Tara, thank you so much for taking the time and enduring through the hour of technical difficulties to be here with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, the first question I wanted to ask is the term Kundalini can come across to many as a novel term. I think in some circles it might even be looked at as a little new age, although I'm not buying into that characterization. But if someone were to come to this interview and be confused by the term, it's not something they might have heard in Theravada circles, etc. How would you explain it and why is it relevant?
Yeah, let me explain a little bit about Buddhist history to make sure that nobody gets the impression that this is just a very modern, new agey thing. Kundalini has existed for many, many centuries in different cultures. I explain it from the Buddhist point of view. So the Buddha worked in 2,500 years ago, and then for a few hundred years we had Theravada, and then for a few hundred years we had Mahayana, and then around the 6th century, then we had the Tantrayana, and that is often referred to as the third turning of the Buddhist wheel of wisdom. And here in the Tantrayana, we people work with the inner energies, with the channels, with the chakras, and most importantly, with the Kundalini. And in layman's terms, Kundalini is sexual energy that isn't voided down and out through sexual acts, but are reversed and brought into the body. And what it does in the body, it illuminates things that are in the shadow, which is a term of modern psychology, but it's very useful here. So basically, things that were repressed in your unconscious mind will, through this process, become conscious. That can, for some people, be very disorientating and tumultuous phase. But ultimately, it's a good thing to happen because if you have a lot of negativity in your unconscious mind, you cannot get enlightened no matter how much you meditate. It's just something that drags you down. And so in Tantrayana, they worked very much with this energy. And interestingly, in Tantrayana, mostly women were teachers, and the men voluntarily looked up to their female teachers because they thought women are more talented in this area. And this phase went on until 1200. And then the Muslims came, and then Buddhism was mostly eradicated in India. And from this Tantrayana phase, two branches survived. And one is Kundalini Yoga in India, and the other one is Tibetan Buddhism. And as far as I understand, in Kundalini Yoga, they don't have many scriptures that have survived. Maybe this was oral traditions, and things might have been distorted or not. I don't know that so much. But in Tibetan Buddhism, it is their speciality that they've really preserved these texts as they were written in the original, meticulously from one teacher to the next, and then they form these very, very long lineages. And one lineage is, for example, the Mahasiddha, as they're called in Tantrayana, was a lady called Sugasiddhi, and she taught Tilupa, and he taught Naropa, which is a famous person, a scholar in Tibetan Buddhism. And then Marpa, the translator from Tibet, came over the mountains down to India, got the texts, brought them home, translated them, taught his very famous disciple Milarepa. And from Milarepa, we've heard, Milarepa is one of the most famous saints in Tibetan Buddhism. And from him, we've heard that he used the meditation he called Kundalini, which is the same thing. It's just been a little bit different word. And he said this Kundalini meditation is very much superior to other meditations that he's done. And he claimed that through that method that uses desire as the agent, we can actually reach enlightenment in one single lifetime, which in other branches of Buddhism is not seen like that, where they say you have to practice and practice for aeons and many, many lifetimes. And so we also know similar practices in Qigong and from China, where in the pelvis they call it the Dantian, and then through certain breathing techniques and visualizations they channel this energy up the spine and then down in the front of the body, and they call that microcosmic orbit or small water wheel or a small universe. And but it's the same idea that the energy from the lower bottom of our body is transferred to the higher chakras and energy levels. And now if you go on Amazon and you put in Kundalini, and then you get some very highly rated book, Kundalini, open your third eye, develop the supernatural powers. It's probably written by a chatbot. I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit prejudiced here. But as Buddhists, we are obviously taught that we shouldn't have a priority wish to develop these supernatural powers. Nevertheless, through the work with the Kundalini energy, we are capable of developing these powers, clairvoyance, spiritual healing, but they are, as we know, they are a byproduct. Our main goal should always be to reach enlightenment for the sake of all beings. And but that is also the great danger in the whole Kundalini situation, because some people can use that for unscrupulous gains, and spiritual teachers, which we know as charlatans, who abuse their disciples, of which we unfortunately have so many. If they're very successful, then they have a siddhi called fascination power, which we also call charisma, which is this energy, this sexual energy that suffuses their whole being. So they become highly attractive. They can attract a lot of followers, and then they can abuse them to their heart's desire. And we know many, many stories where that's happened. And so that's the dark side of the Kundalini. And why some people might be also afraid of that. But in principle, it is a, it's the strongest fuel in our spiritual quest. And so you have to be careful. If you have a very strong fuel, if you put that into your car suddenly drives double as fast. But in principle, it is a good thing.
Thank you for that description and tracing the threads back all the way to, the early days of Buddhism and contextualizing this term Kundalini. For those who weren't intentionally practicing these different techniques, weren't intentionally bringing up Kundalini, but still, is it possible for that energy to awaken regardless? And if that happens without a teacher or a guide or intention, what are the pitfalls, or what have you seen as kind of the Kundalini syndrome, as you call it?
Yes. So in my work as a Kundalini therapist, I work with just those people who had so-called spontaneous Kundalini awakenings. And they said, what have I done? Why have I been chosen? I've never been even that spiritual. And then they can be easily overwhelmed, by this experience. So I personally like to call the Kundalini awakening a consciousness expansion. This is what this really is. And I only use the word Kundalini because people can find me on Google. They would otherwise not find me. But we have what this is not a physical event. It is a consciousness expansion, and the consciousness expansion happens foremost in 4 areas. The first one is that our own unconscious mind becomes conscious. And our unconscious mind is literally stored in our physical body. In the left shoulder, maybe I have some traumas from my childhood that I can't remember, don't want to remember. In the right shoulder, I have some horrible antisocial aggressive impulses that, of course, I do not want to know at all because I'm a nice Buddhist. And so our entire body is a storehouse of all that stuff from this life and from our previous lives, tendencies. And they're often in conflict with each other. It's chaos, and when the Kundalini arises, then this conscious material becomes conscious, and then people say, I remember childhood traumas, I get so sensitive, everything gets to me, my family, I can't stand them any longer, my husband, I need to divorce him. I mean, I'm exaggerating, I'm just saying the worst case scenarios. Please, nobody getting afraid that this will all happen to them, I'm just saying that some people, if they haven't worked on themselves before and they live their life in a rather unconscious way and have made decisions, maybe marrying a certain person and then remaining in a bad marriage, that they might very well say, I can't stand this anymore. This pushing things under the rug doesn't work anymore. And this can, of course, be very disconcerting. So that's the first part, where the consciousness awakenings expansion happens, our own unconscious mind. The second one is that the same happens with other people, that we can look behind the mask. Oh, this nice person that I knew, suddenly I can see all this passive aggression in them. That's not so nice. Or I can see how they're manipulative or some ways and so on. The third aspect is paranormal experiences, visions, clairvoyance, voices, all sorts of stuff. And for the unprepared, that can be very frightening. Some people take it totally in their stride, but others say, I'm going mad, I need to go to psychiatry and get some pills, It depends on your personality. And then the fourth consciousness expansion is, of course, the one we all want, and that is higher states of spiritual enlightenment. You feel it as often in the presence of getting amazing states of bliss. And through this bliss, so this incredible joy and rapture, you can actually then recognize the nature of reality, which we want to do. And that's the ultimate purpose, the ultimate consciousness expansion of what we want to achieve. Now, some people love paranormal experiences, others get afraid of them. Higher stages of consciousness, enlightenment, of course, we love that. Maybe some people also feel a bit bad about it and say they are now so different from normal society, they don't know how to fit in anymore. So all of these things can create a lot of disconcerting experiences. But it doesn't have to be that way. And particularly if you're prepared for it, if you know that this will come and you recognize that, it's a little bit like puberty. If you are prepared for it, if you've been told what will happen, you're not so upset when it happens. Otherwise, you might think you have a sickness of some kind or something's gone terribly wrong.
I know people who do think that. So, if we were to approach or speak about the revealing of the darkness in ourselves, and to some extent intuiting what was behind the mask, perhaps in others, and not being able to push stuff under the rug anymore, I'm curious about two scenarios. One is how you would guide just someone, maybe it's not this massive single event, but rather just a lot of the things you pointed to on a mundane level are happening. They are becoming aware of some of their darker tendencies, and that is disconcerting when they expected their life to grow just brighter from the practice, and they don't feel like they're able to fit in to their life as it was anymore. How do you guide people through that? And then I am curious at one point to talk about the more acute scenario where someone goes to a multi-day retreat and comes out with pretty severe symptoms of dissociation and the like. But to start with the more gentle scenario, how would you advise someone to move through that?
Yes, so information is key. This is the same, like I said, with puberty. If you know what will happen, it doesn't frighten you that much. But with Kundalini, it is often you feel you're the only one in your peer group. You don't know anyone else who has that. And just imagine you had puberty all by yourself, nobody else. Everybody stayed children, and you are becoming a teenager. That could be quite frightening. But if somebody comes along and says, well, everybody will go through this eventually, and you're a little bit the first, or you're ahead of the crowd, and this and this will happen, look out for it, and all is there for a good purpose. Just like in puberty, overall, it's there for procreation and having a family. And I don't think many people would object that that's a good idea. Uh, in the Kundalini awakening, the ultimate purpose is to reach enlightenment and to have this higher stages of realization, and most importantly, stabilize them. And so these types of things need to be explained. And also, some people come to me and say, Tara, do I need to move to the country now? I don't want to move to the country. I'm quite happy in my big city. The answer is, of course, then you stay in the big city. This is just something that a lot of people will eventually want to do. They want to have more quiet and solitude and so forth. And so that's just a general point of view. And if you read on the internet about the Kundalini, there is so much confusion and so many horror stories. So that's also something that I would advise immediately. As long as you are a little bit frightened about this, and don't read horror stories on the internet. I have obviously to advertise my own book. Read my book. It's called Healing Kundalini Symptoms, or um, Enlightenment Through the Path of Kundalini. And there I will give you a realistic, grounded scenario of what you can expect. And it's all not so bad. Basically, the Kundalini will egg you on to become a more wholesome person who likes things like being in nature, um, in your work, wanting to help other people, want to eat a more healthful diet. None of that needs to be a horror trip, not at all. And you will be confronted with stuff from your unconscious mind. If you're good at that, maybe you had already some psychotherapy, or you had a good grounding in witness consciousness, so you are able to observe the contents of your mind rather than being swept away by them. Then all of that can be a walk in the park. So do not read horror stories. Don't do that. If you go to some of these Kundalini groups, Facebook groups, and there's almost like a competition. Who suffers the most? Oh, I've been in bed for 20 years. I can't get up. I surely have the best Kundalini awakening. That's nonsense. This is Kundalini is not a disease in any form. It doesn't need to entail any psychological breakdown at all. This only very, very few people experience that, but of course that gets the most attention. Many people take that in their stride, and are actually very, very happy. And even from the many clients that I have, even though they come to me because they can't cope, yeah, all of them, they say, well, it is hard work, but would I not want to have it? No, I definitely, I'm glad I have this. This is access to all we ever wanted. It's only that all we ever wanted comes with a few caveats. And so we have to master a few challenges, but it can be done. It's not so difficult. And then your next question, if somebody has like real bad symptoms, you say dissociations and stuff like that, I would try to do away with those types of words. The question is, what are your emotions? Anxiety, sadness, anger. That's all we ever deal with. So you can dissociate it and be happy as Larry, right? So it doesn't need to be a problem. But if you're dissociated and you get really anxious and you think, I'm not really in this world, it's all so flimsy, and is this even real? Maybe this is all nihilistic, nothing, and you have high level of anxiety with that, then you need to treat the anxiety, not this type of thoughts. Comes the anxiety down, the world is nihilistic or not, it doesn't bother you at all. You think, yeah, maybe this is all a dream, but it doesn't, you're not getting afraid about this. And that's what we want. So bring it down to those three emotions. And then in the method that I have developed, which is based on Tibetan Buddhism, I have an anti-anxiety technique, an anti-depression technique, and an anti-anger technique. They all work very quickly, very effectively. Nobody who's ever worked with this as my client has continued to have high levels of negative emotions. You bring it down very quickly. Now, these emotions are a little bit more, you could say, forceful than just observing the mind, which you do in the mindfulness type exercises where people usually get the advice, you just sit there, observe your mind. That's a little bit of a tall order if you are in the middle of a panic attack, or if you are so in despair, or having very, very strong emotions. If you know how to work with the inner energies, you can visualize a flower that opens into a flower bud, that opens into a flower, and that brings down the anxiety much, much faster. Within minutes, it comes down from, let's say, an 8 out of 10 to 4 out of 10. And then you just keep doing that. Anxiety comes down and down and down. After a few days, a few weeks, it's down at a 3, 2. If you keep working at it, which a lot of people don't do, if they had 2 or 3, they are okay. But if you want to get it to 0, you can get it to 0. You have no anxieties anymore. They're all gone. No more fears. And that's irrespective of what's happening around you or within you. It's the same
Thank
with
you.
the other. It's the same with the others, with the sadness, despair, anger, something.
And would some of those practices involve these sort of calming meditations or just a grounding, and also in tandem with the view that this is normal, that we don't have to be too alarmed, something of that nature?
Yes, if you do know that Kundalini, it is an intensifier. It intensifies all your good feelings, bad feelings, but also the good ones. So if you see a beautiful garden or a beautiful side of something, you can get such intense feelings of rapture, of bliss that you've never had before. I mean, that's the good side of this whole thing. But if you then, somebody comes and blows a whistle and it's an annoying noise, and you think, ah, I can't stand this is so bad. And so the sensitivity to sense sensations, or the reaction, reacting with strong feelings towards these types of things also intensifies, which
And
doesn't need to be which doesn't need to be a problem, because you just use these techniques,
mm,
and then you calm this whole thing down again, and then you just keep the good things.
okay, so the sensitivity to the negative can be softened, and eventually, without those techniques, does the mind move? Is it a bit like a raw wound that gets healed naturally with time if someone doesn't have, access to these particular techniques, or is do we just have to adjust our lives to have less whistles blown in our ear? And is that just like the kind of situation, or does the wound heal? And I know
Um,
the wound is the wrong metaphor here, but the opening or the sensitivity.
so let's just say people don't know, like myself, it all happens in the dark 1970s. Nobody knew anything about anything. And I had this Kundalini awakening, and I had quite severe symptoms. And yes, and I didn't know I had a Kundalini awakening. And yes, over the years, I found relief. I did some psychotherapy, I did some yoga. I worked on myself in any way I could think of. And I then had also a Buddhist teacher, which I know now also had Kundalini awakening, and he had really good methods, and that really helped me. And that was all before I developed my own methods. And so I also find that with my clients, if I'm not available to help them, then maybe they find another local therapist. And the only thing that really aggravates this, we should maybe say that as a warning, is energy healing. So if you go to an energy healer of any form, like Reiki healers, or with the hands-on energy healing, that for some reason has often a makes it worse. And I've heard this dozens or hundreds of times among my clients, that you have to be very careful with that. But even just going in nature, or encountering a meditation like mindfulness, which is very gentle, very just sit, count your breath, all of this can help. And people will reach out for these methods, because Kundalini is not a disease. It doesn't make you sitting sulking in the corner. If you have basically a good motivation, you will keep that good motivation, and you will say, okay, I've got a crisis here now, let's do something about that. And then they will look whatever resources they have, their availability, and will find that. But obviously, I would say if you do the higher consciousness healing exercises, which are devised for this problem,
Mhm.
you get there faster, much faster.
And is there, obviously you can't give us a full rundown of any of those at the moment. Are there any like hints or general ways of describing what that entails for someone who's kind of in a situation like this, or something that a safe place you could point them where, that they could at least get some relief, something like that?
Well, all the exercises are in my book, and there are easy exercises. I just give an example of one. Yeah, the anti-anxiety exercise. So the way I work with that is that I get people to rate their anxiety on a scale. from 0 to 10. Let's say they're at 6. And then I do a little meditation with them. The first one is that they need to get in contact with what they consider their higher consciousness or their deity. Could be Jesus or Buddha or whoever, and if they don't have anybody, it can be the Divine Mother, and get into this comforting connection with them. People often don't utilize that enough, because praying is a little bit out of fashion with a lot of people. And then they have like a higher consciousness, like the source or the universe. But the universe isn't very comforting. You need a person, a humanoid person. And so you start doing that. Then you visualize a ball of light around you with strong boundaries, which represents your energy field. And for people who have taken drugs or who have traumas of some, there's often holes in there. So if you have the holes in there, bad energies can come in, and you feel that, and they frighten you. And you can repair that through your visualization. So you visualize those, repairing those holes. And then third step is self-love. I love myself with all my problems and weaknesses, total self-acceptance, stopping the self-hatred, stopping saying to yourself, oh, I should be over this. I've done already so much therapy. Why am I having this problem? No, total self-acceptance. And it can be taught and it can be learned. And then that's the 3 ground steps. And then the 4th step is to pinpoint the anxiety in your body. And you might feel it in, let's say, in your chest. You imagine in your chest a flower bud, and with the out breath, the flower bud opens, releasing, relaxing the tense, anxious, anxiety energy that is there. It's an energy, it's a contraction, and you can relax and release that if you guide it. It's not that difficult. So then beautiful light radiates out of this flower, out to the end of the universe, diluting, letting go. It's an image of letting go. And then you breathe slower and slower and slower. As you breathe slower, you remove energy from the anxiety. People who are anxious, they breathe like this. If you guide them to stop breathing like this, slow down the breath, the anxiety has nowhere to manifest. And all of this can be taught within 5 minutes. Bit slower, like I've just done it right now, but not much slower. And after these 5 minutes, anxiety is down 50%. If you then carry on practicing in this way, comes down to a 75%, 80%, 90% gone. Then it comes back. Oh, it hasn't worked. No, it has worked. This is how the mind works. It always comes back. So you do it again. And gradually you master this. You can completely and utterly remove those negative emotions from your mind. If you don't have these emotions, nothing bothers you.
Thank you, Tara. That was very helpful. And the image of the unfurling flower is just beautiful. I can really intuit how that would soften this kind of tension. And one thing I hadn't expected you to speak about was the holes in the oral field caused by drug use or other things. And to be honest, I've been very interested in this. As you know, in Buddhism, we have the 5th precept against intoxicants. And one thing that's been interesting to bump up against has been the recent focus on plant medicine or psychedelic usage, using psychedelics in the service of the spiritual path. I know some of the research around it, and yet it also seems to, in many ways, be in real tension with this 5th precept. And I'm curious if, is there any wisdom in the kind of areas you're aware of around, can these compounds rip holes in that oral field in the same way? And should people really approach that realm with caution because of that?
Okay. Many years ago, I started my career as a counselor, as a drugs counselor. So I saw all these car crashes just from using marijuana. And now as a Kundalini therapist, same thing. I have many clients who have taken psychedelics and had a simultaneous Kundalini awakening. They really are the ones that suffer the worst. It's really bad. So unfortunately, I have a very dim view on all of this.
No, I
And I
think you're right up our alley on that one, actually.
Yeah, I know they say ayahuasca can't do any harm. This is just not what I experience. I've got not lots, some clients who come to me after these ayahuasca ceremonies in a terrible state with extreme anxiety and uh, and and so showing all the signs of drug psychosis, or let's say drug crisis,
Mm,
and need a lot of reassurance until that comes down. So the image I use is, we have some landmines in our brain, and you don't know how many landmines you have, but it might be just one drug use, one joint, and this
mm,
landmine goes up and makes, a lot of damage that will haunt you for years and decades.
mm.
And so for that reason, I say don't do it. People think it's a shortcut. I think it's a very, very dangerous path to tread on.
It might, it's a path that okay, the landmine analogy is quite good. And do you feel that all the drugs that are there any ones you've seen as especially dangerous or damaging? And if someone does trip on one of those landmines, what do you see to repair it? Is it just a steady healing once you've stepped on the explosive?
Well, again, it depends very much on your own resilience, your own resources that you have to get over something like that. I would hope that if I had an experience like that, I would get over it more quickly. But after a lifetime of working with these types of things, uh, but it depends how much ability they have of witnessing their emotions rather than identifying with that. And it's like a very bad dream you can dream after that. It's a nightmare. And well, if you ask me which drugs are particularly dangerous, well, all the psychedelics, all of them, and the whole potpourri. The alcohol just destroys your body. It leaves your mind more intact, but it destroys your liver and your brain and everything else. And cigarette as well, they give you lung cancer and so on. So no, it's the psychedelics that are the problems. But I don't want people to be put in prison for having that. I don't think that that's a good thing. But if you legalize them, but you don't really give people proper warnings, that I
Mm.
don't think that's a good move either.
Thank you. This is yeah, it's refreshing to hear that perspective, and I do know people who have definitely tripped on very large landmines. Um, Another landmine that seems to, well, the analogy might be wrong, but another issue I've seen manifest with people's spiritual path is, and I think it might be associated with Kundalini awakening and this expansion of consciousness, is first of all, some monastics who, as they enter robes or stay at monasteries for long periods, certainly some of the things in the shadow come to light, like childhood trauma, but then also sometimes there's these very persistent health problems which won't go away and which seem almost inexplicable. They can't map them onto anything in particular, but it's often enough that it'll drive people to disrobe or take pretty drastic action. Um, what's that, and what would you advise? I mean, is that associated with this awakening?
No, Kundalini in no way or form is a form of disease. And
Mm,
as a whole, my clients are a quite healthy bunch. And I think it is because this awakening process drives you to improve your life in every way, and that includes also your diet and all the health treatments that you do, like wanting to practice Qigong or yoga and so on. And now, the way I understand celibacy is, if you look at it in the context of Kundalini, is the idea is if you put a stop to all sexual activities, then the sexual energy only has one way to go, and that is up. Yeah, and basically forcing a Kundalini awakening. The reality is often that's the theory. In practice, that it doesn't often work like that. And what really works is a repression of sexual energy. Is basically numb yourself down from the waist downward. It's just like, okay, that's the stuff we're not dealing with. No more power, no more sex, and no more greed for money and all of that. Yeah, poverty and celibacy and obedience, three main vows, isn't it? And so that pertains to the three lower chakras. So then people really try to work basically with the upper chakras, have a lot of awareness, a lot of loving kindness, non-violent speaking, and so on. And the trouble with that is that the lower chakras are also responsible for everything physical in our life, and that includes our health. And if you do away with the lower part of your body and say, I'm not interested in all that stuff anymore, then it can lead to a under-energizing of this part. But if you're over-energized in your lower body and you're a monk and you go around and always feel extremely sexually aroused, that's a problem, right? What do you do with that? And so over time, this kind of many, celibates just learn to not go there mentally anymore. And so then the whole thing becomes numb and under-energized, and that brings health problems. And how do I know this? Because when you look who's working with energy medicine the most skillful, that's the Chinese with the whole Qigong movement. And what do? Basically, they help you through the Qigong exercises to energize the lower chakras. I mean, they call that Damtian. They don't use the word chakras, so that's just cultural. And so you energize the lower chakras, and by basically focusing a lot on meditating on your navel or the center below the navel, and doing pelvic floor exercises where you squeeze and let go and feel the energy flowing from there. And if you do that, then your health gets better.
Thank you. I found Qigong to be one of the most powerful articulations of the energy movement I've ever encountered. And I can definitely understand and appreciate the issue of a monastic or a celibate turning away from those energies completely and not knowing how to channel them correctly, and that just leading to a stagnation of sorts. One thing I've seen with some practitioners is you spoke about the third expansion of consciousness being a sensitivity to the paranormal. And I'm curious if you see this. It's quite accepted in Thailand, but I've seen very few Westerners undergo that particular sensitivity, at least in a way that they are willing to speak about. So I'm curious, first of all, is this something you do see often in people? And what do they do with it? And just as a little sidebar, I've noticed sometimes the people who seem sensitive to that realm, maybe not, I don't know if it's completely associated, but there tends to be sometimes a proclivity to conspiracy theory. And I'm not saying that the supernatural are delusional, because we believe in such things. I'm just saying, I'm curious how you see that awakening playing out in people, and are there pitfalls such as that?
Okay, I first talk about just the paranormal. Do many of my clients have that? The answer is absolutely yes. But there are also quite a number who have. I have a Kundalini awakening test. Everybody can have that for free on my website. You just have to put your name in there and you get the test. There are 5 criteria for Kundalini awakening, and the 5th one is paranormal experiences. And not everybody has that when they come to me, but everybody will get that along the line. You know, people get more clairvoyant and get more, you know, they can do things with their minds which they shouldn't be able to do, and so forth. And but some people also get frightened of this, where it happens involuntarily, and then you need to have ways of shutting this down. And this, again, it can be done. You can tell your mind, thank you, but no thank you. I don't want to see any ghosts. And you just you can talk to your mind like you would talk to a child, you know, no, we're not interested in ghosts. We're not doing that. And then the mind is like a little child, just doesn't listen the first time you tell it something. So another ghost experience. Then you just say it again, like a mother, kindly but strictly. No, no ghosts. We're not doing that. And if you do that for a little while, you know, weeks, months, just like educating a child, your mind will, your unconscious mind will listen, and then these experiences will get less and then stop. But you should be very careful when you shut your third eye, you know, because once you shut it, it's not so easy to open it again. And afterwards you think, oh, I used to have all these insights, and I knew all this and that, and now I feel I see nothing. So, you know, you need to be careful. And basically the paranormal experiences, you can also choose them. You know, you can make a list. I want to do spiritual healing. I think that one is a good one to have. You know, if a family member is ill, you just put your hands on them. Don't need to call the doctor so quickly, and you can heal yourself, and that's a good one to have. I personally also absolutely want to always know everything. You know, I want to have answers to my questions, and so this is the supernatural power that in me has developed the strongest. And that I have conversation with my Tara, and she answers me. And a lot of clients, you know, go that way. You know, they I had a Kundalini support group last week, and somebody asked that question, like you, who can talk to God? Does it happen often? And I said, okay, let's make a little survey. And I just asked the people present, which were 15 people, so who of you can speak to God? And 5 people lifted their hand. You know, so it's you know, a lot of them can do that. You know, it is actually something that is dormant in us. And you know, when you don't have a Kundalini awakening, you think that's complete blasphemy, or you know, futile to even think that you could do this. But you know, we can do a lot more things, but we were never told that we can do this. You know, I remember 30 years ago, I was in London in England, and they have a college for psychic studies. And so I went there, and basically what I discovered there is that I had a fully functioning clairvoyance already. I just never used it. And when I had clairvoyant experiences, I would doubt them, and I would think, oh, that's weird. What is this? But after I've been there and had the confirmation through those exercises that's set up, I knew I could do this very easily. You know, I always could do this. I don't know if I always could do it, but I definitely at that point I already could do it. And so yes, these experiences will come, and they will come in the area of your greatest passion. So if you, let's say, you want to be a healer, you probably you know, develop first the healing abilities. If you want to know everything like me, you might get clairvoyant, and so forth. Yeah. So, and you can guide that through your own wishes, and where you put your energy, that's where you will get these cities. Okay, now that was the first part of the question. Now the second one, what about conspiracy theories? So conspiracy theories, I believe they're getting more and more due to the internet. You know, when we were young, when I was young, we had a kind of idea, there are the experts, and here we are little worms who know nothing. and we can trust the experts. That was the prevailing view. There was a consensus like that. People were not like today, where they all think they know everything themselves, and the experts are all not fools and so on. And that clearly, for me, very clearly comes through to the internet. Because no matter what kind of idea you have, you just type it into Google, you're bound to find a community that will reinforce that belief, and then you become very suspicious and of normal society, and that's maybe one. I mean, there's many good things through the internet, but that's a problematic one, because I'm very sure there will be more and more conspiracy theories. We see that already, how they influence elections with these types of conspiracy theories, ideas. I mean, 20, 30 years, this would be unthinkable. Everybody would have laughed at these ideas. But now, because there's so many people who want to believe this kind of stuff, and they find many others who also do, then they feel empowered to to think that as well. And so it's the problem with conspiracy theories is that they make you feel bad. If you really believe in them, you feel disempowered, very angry, very upset, possibly depressed and despairing, because you just feel like a little worm, and there's this terrible force that wants you to bring you down in some way. And so I definitely say, be careful not to go in that direction, because there's nothing good in there. You might get an initial high where you think, oh, now I know how this all works, and I figured it all out, and chemtrails, and yeah, they're coming again and throwing chemicals onto me. But how do I feel if I year after year believe things like that? Very, very bad indeed. And so if you don't have proof, absolute proof that what you believe is true, and it makes you feel bad, maybe you just don't want to go there.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara, for all this wisdom. And I won't believe in chemtrails for the next few years at least, hopefully spurred on by you. But I just really appreciate you taking the time. We have a very somewhat isolated or insular landscape of how we conceive of spiritual practice in some of the meditative circles I move through mainly, and to bring in this other perspective, which speaks to and touches on so many relevant experiences people have, is very helpful. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join and speak with us.
You're welcome.
And I'll put Tara's website into the show notes for those who are interested in finding or connecting with her. And take care. I know you're near South Africa, I believe, at the moment.
Near Morocco, which is North Africa.
North Africa, sorry. Okay, well, I hope so is it summer there or winter in that case? Are we
It is winter,
north of
but
the equator?
it is
Okay,
winter, but it is warm.
okay, good. Well, have a wonderful time there, and we hope to, if you ever are near Seattle, please come say hello.
I will. Thanks, Ajahn.